So our objective today is to build and deploy a generative AI application using React and OpenAI APIs. A bunch of important useful references are indicated here. So you can check out these references. All of them are useful for you to get started. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by just getting access to the OpenAI API. Then we are going to do a development setup and connect a basic React.js application to the OpenAI API. And then as a third step, we are going to build some AI-powered application features. Okay. So that's basically what we're trying to do. Let us get started step by step. I want to show you an example application that we have built out internally at Jovial. So I'm going to share the link to it as well. So this example application that I want to show you is called a lead code assistant. What this does is it's a personal programming coach powered by ChatGPT. So what you can do is when you're working on a lead code problem, you can simply paste the question here. You can paste the code that you have written here. You can mention the programming language, and it is going to tell you whether your solution is correct or incorrect. And if your solution is incorrect, it is going to tell you exactly why your solution is incorrect. Okay. So let me give an example here. You can pick any lead code problem. It even works with hard level problems, but I'm just going to say print hello world in Python. Okay, let's say that is the question. And let's say the code you've written is console.log hello. So I'm just new to programming. I'm not sure what the syntax of Python is. And I just put in the programming language Python. So this is the question, this is the code, and this is the programming language. And if I click start conversation, it is then going to say that my solution is incorrect. The code uses the wrong syntax for Python, and console.log is JavaScript syntax, not Python. And in Python, we use the print function to display the console output on the console, right? So it's it's doing something slightly more than what I might get with ChatGPT. So if I simply just paste this in ChatGPT, I may not get this kind of a structured response, right? So we'll talk about how to get these kind of responses out of the OpenAI API, but you can also continue the conversation here and you can say something like, okay, what's the correct code then? All right, you say that, and it is going to then say that the correct code is print hello world. So this is one. Similarly, there's other examples here. So there is this there is this mock interview bot. So here, what you can do is you can just select a job. You can type a job role. Let's say I'm interviewing for a data analyst role. And I can click start conversation. It is going to say, hello, welcome to the interview for the position of data analyst. Can you please introduce yourself? And if I say something like, I'm Akash, CEO of Jovial, and then it's going to follow up with the next question. Can you tell me about your experience with data analysis? And I say something like no experience. So now it is behaving like an interviewer. And you can imagine if you just connect this with some kind of a voice API, then you can actually create like a real mock interviewer, maybe even create a digital avatar. And that's a good project idea to work on. All right. So again, if you just put this into ChatGPT, if I just go into chat.openai.com and simply send this message, it is not going to, so it just says, hello, how can I assist you as a data analyst, right? So ChatGPT doesn't know that it needs to be a mock interviewer, but somehow Jobot in this case, in this particular application knows how to do that. Okay. So how exactly do we do this? How exactly do we build these kind of AI powered applications? So the first step is to go ahead and sign up on the OpenAI API platform. So if you just search for OpenAI platform, you will get this link, platform.openai.com. This is where all the APIs are documented, and this is where you can actually get access. So if you're signed out, just sign in. And once you're signed in, then you can generate an API key that you can use within your applications. So how many people are familiar with the concept of API key? I guess most of you are, right? Great, perfect. Anybody who is not, just raise your hand and somebody from our team will come help you out. So the OpenAI platform allows you to maybe set up an organization, invite team members, and generate API keys and connect to applications. So let's go into a manage account section, because this is something that you will have to do. So into your manage account section, there are a few things that you'll have to do. First is you need to go into billing, and you will need to add a payment method. Because again, this depends. OpenAI keeps changing it. Sometimes they give free credits. Sometimes they require you to add a credit card, even though they give you free credits. So I believe they give you $3 or so of free credits, which is a lot already for a lot of experimentation. But If they don't, then you can add your payment method and you'll have to put in a credit card. You will also have to verify your phone number. Okay. Now, don't worry about getting charged thousands of dollars. What you can do is you can come into usage limits and you can actually set up a usage limit. So we have in our team, we've set up a usage limit of $240 that is able to sustain, and this is per month. So that is able to actually sustain all the usage on JoBot. That's a lot. But you can set maybe a $5 or a $10 limit for yourself so that you do not get charged beyond a few $100 when you are using these APIs in your application. Okay, this is sort of the hard stop that you can set on getting charged. So again, just want to repeat, platform.openai.com is where you need to sign in and you need to add a payment method and you need to set some usage limits. Of course, you can figure all this out, but it's just like a quick first steps for you to set up. Now, once you have done that, the next thing for you to do is actually create a secret API key that you will need to connect to the OpenAI API. Okay. So you go into the API keys section under your account settings and click on create new secret key and then give the secret key a name. So I'm just going to give this GenHack June workshop. And typically for every application that you're creating, you might want to create a separate API key so that if that application is getting abused, you can simply disable the API key or something. So I'm just going to click create secret key. And this key should be kept secret. You should not be showing it to people. You should not be putting it directly into your code base and uploading it on GitHub because then others can use your key. So I'm just going to copy this and put it somewhere really safe, like this note over here. Please don't use this key. I will disable it after the workshop. And let's save the secret key. Okay. So once you make sure that you save this key because that's what you need to put in to connect with the OpenAI API. Now, once you have done this, once you have saved up the secret key, you will not be able to see it again. But if you ever need to revoke it, you could just come in here and revoke it. All right. You can also, one other thing I want to point out is you can also check the usage. So if you just come into the usage section, you can see what is the daily usage. So in our case, it looks like we're spending about $20 a day, roughly, on the best days. And you can also break that down by different users in your organization. Okay. So that is the basic setup of how to get access to OpenAI. And we'll talk about how to use it in a second. But anybody who's completely lost, anybody who's feeling, okay, this is not making sense at all. All right. If you are, just raise your hand and now or later, and somebody will come and help you out. So now we're done with that. We have signed up on the OpenAI platform. We have added the payment method and generated an API key. The next step is to explore the API docs and identify the required APIs. So I'm just going to go in here into the API reference section. And it says here that you can interact with the API through HTTP requests or via official Python or Node.js libraries. So there are a bunch of libraries that OpenAI provides. Then there are a bunch of community maintained libraries. We also have a library that we created that we are going to use today just to make things a little easier for you. So there are a bunch of open source tools that you can use to connect to the OpenAI API. The key thing is that whenever you are calling any of these APIs, you need to provide the OpenAI API key as a header, as an HTTP header. So you need to, the header name should be authorization and the header value should be bearer space your OpenAI API key. And that is how you connect to the API. Okay. So here is an example using curl. We will look at an example. How many of you use something like Postman? A lot of people. Okay. So we'll use a REST API client, but basically what you need to do is you need to hit this endpoint, and into this endpoint, you need to mention this token. You don't actually need to mention this organization, but you definitely need to mention this token. And and then you can maybe call a specific API. Okay. So we are going to be using the ChatGPT API. So on the left over here, you will see a chat option. And under chat, there is an API called chat completions. So we are going to be using the chat completions API. Let me just zoom out here a bit. So the chat completions API looks like this. It contains, this is the API we need to hit, api.openai.com/v1/chat completions. And this is the HTTP method that we need to use. The method that we need to use is post. And this is the request body. So in the request body, we can provide a model. Do you want to use GPT 3.5? Do you want to use GPT 4? Do you want to use GPT-4 with some additional features? So there are a bunch of models. So you can actually go and check out what are all the models that are provided. So here on the chat completions, you can use GPT-4, GPT-4 0613, GPT 3.5 Turbo. Yeah, looks like it's just 3.5 and 4 and various versions of those. The default, I believe, is GPT 3.5 Turbo. That is the one that you should be using for most of your applications. And then you can give it a list of messages. For example, over here, there is a message with the role, with a certain role input, whatever, and then it replies with a certain response. Okay. So that is the most basic usage. Now, of course, there are a bunch of other things. There's something called functions that was launched recently that we'll touch on very briefly. There's something called temperature, top P, N, stream, a bunch of other things that you can configure that, again, as you need to, you can look into these. Okay. So that is the API endpoint we need to call. And we are going to use a simple tool. Yeah, we are going to use a simple tool called Insomnia, which is it's a REST client. It is a tool for sending API or testing out API requests. You can also use something like Postman. This is just a slightly lighter tool that I like to use. So this is the tool that we're using to connect to the API. Okay, so I'm just going to create a, let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to call the API here. So the API endpoint we want to call is api.openai.com/v1/chat completions. So I'm going to paste that in here. And I am going to change the method to post. So we are going to do a post request. Okay. Now, remember, we need to pass in the authorization header. So let me come in here into headers. And in the headers, let me add a header called authorization. And then let me say bearer. And let me come in and paste my OpenAI API key over here. Bearer API key. So that is the header that you need to pass into this API request. And now I can come back. I can maybe come and add a body. So the body needs to be a JSON body. Okay. So, yep. And here is a sample body. So I'm just going to copy this body. Let's see. Okay. So this is the body. This is the actual message that we are sending to the OpenAI API. Yep. So we are sending the data that we want to use the model GPT 3.5 Turbo, and we want to send the message. We want to send two messages. So each message has a role. Okay. So one message is a system message. A system message is going to define the overall behavior of the model. And then one message is a user message. So the system message is typically set by the developer. You as the developer, when you're using the API on your backend, you might set the system message just to configure how the model should behave. And the user message is something that maybe the end user of your application will enter. Okay. And we'll look at examples of these soon. So the system message we're setting is you are a helpful assistant. And the user message we're setting is hello. And let us just click send. And just like that, with our API key, we get back this completion. So if I just make this a little bigger, you can see that we got back a completion. So the completion has an ID, it has a type, etc. It has a certain model and all of that. But here's the important information. So there is something called choices here. Let's see, maybe I can. All right. Never mind. So there is something called choices here. So in the choices, so basically your completion data response is going to have an object called choices. And in the choices object, you are going to have a list of choices. So you can ask the assistant to generate not just one response, maybe, but 5 possible responses or 10 possible responses. But the most common use case is to just generate one response. Now in the first choice, we have a message. And you can see that there is a message here, and the message is of the role assistant. So any messages generated by the OpenAI API will have the role assistant. And in the assistant role, there is this content, hello, how can I assist you today? So basically, we as a user have sent hello, and the model has replied, hello, how can I assist you today? All right. Now, let's say we want to continue the conversation. Now, to continue the conversation, I can come back here. I can take the response from the model. Okay. And I can, so I take the response from the model and then I add another I add another message from my end. Okay, so now I'm going to say, what can you do for me? Okay, so this is one very important point I want to mention. The OpenAI API does not have any conversation history. Anytime you call the chat API, you have to send the full history, including the bot messages, and it's just going to use that full history and it's going to come up with a response. Okay, so keep that in mind. So if you want to continue a conversation, what you do is you send the first message, you get the response, you take that response and then take this next message and then send that. And then the bot is going to come back with a response. So now it's going to take slightly longer because, so now it has come back and now it says, as an AI assistant, I can help you with a variety of tasks and activities. Here's something I can do for you, etc., etc. And now again, you might want to copy this over. You might want to put it in here, and then you might want to continue the conversation. Okay. So I hope you can see as a developer how you can take this API and then build a simple UI on top of it, where you have a history of messages in a variable, you have an input, you take that, you send it, you get the response, you update the history and keep going. Okay. So that is essentially how you use the OpenAI API, just like any other API on the internet. Okay. Now, before we actually start building an application, I want to show you one other thing where you can actually prototype your applications before you start building them. Okay. So here is this playground. So right at the top of the OpenAI platform, you'll see something called a playground. Okay, the playground is not loading. Yeah, let's give that a second. But the OpenAI playground allows you to experiment with different models, experiment with different settings, and experiment with different system prompts. Let's see what's wrong here. Okay, I'm just going to try signing. Oh, there it is. Yeah, cool. So this is the OpenAI playground. In this playground, you can prototype your AI-powered application before you actually start building it out. All right, so what do we want to do here? We want to use the chat API. So in the playground, go into mode and select the chat API. And then you can also go in and select a model. So you can select GPT 3.5 Turbo, you can select GPT-4, you can select GPT 3.5 16 cases. There are a bunch of different models. In most cases, you should be able to just play with the GPT 3.5 Turbo model. Then you can also select a temperature. The temperature controls randomness. So if the higher the temperature, the more random and the more creative the answers get. And this will also lead to a lot of what are called hallucinations or made up information. But the lower the temperature, the less random the answers will get. So again, depending on the type of application you're building, let's say you're building something math related where it has to stick to logic and everything, then you might want to use a lower temperature. Or let's say you want to build something, I don't know, art related, poetry related, then you actually want it to use its creativity. So then you want to use a higher temperature. And again, the temperature is something that you can also pass as a parameter when you are actually calling the model. Okay, it defaults to 1, but you can set it to whatever you want. You can also set the maximum length. So let's say you want to restrict the output to maybe just 100 or 200 tokens. And tokens are not exactly words, but let's say 3 tokens are 2 words, something like that. So to limit the number of words that you want to get as an output. So if you want to get about 100 words, I would put about a 120 or 150 token limit. And then there are a bunch of other things as well that you can check out that I will not get into. So here now you can start prototyping. So let's say if I say, what can you do for me? So this is a user message and I click submit, then it is going to use this model with these settings and it's going to come up with a response in a second. And it's going to reply something like, as an AI language model, I can help you with such and such, etc. Okay. So this is the general ChatGPT model. But what we want to do is we want to restrict it for a particular use case. Okay, so here's what I'm going to put in. You are a lead code assistant that helps people solve lead code problems. Okay, now if I again have to delete this history every time I want to use the system message. So now I've specified a system message, right? System message has a role system. Remember in the API over here, we had this one message at the top with the role system. So now I've specified a system message. This defines the overall behavior of the model. This is something that I've specified as a developer. Now, if a user chats with my model and says, what can you do for me? It is going to be more specific. It says, as a lead code assistant, I can help you with such and such things. And now you can get even more specific. Okay. So remember, I had this lead code example over here. Let's say I want to replicate that. So I want to go into this lead code assistant. Let me just create an example here. So print hello world in Python. And the code the user has entered is console.log hello. And the language is Python. Okay. What I want to get is if this is the input that is given to the model, I want it to say correct or incorrect. And I want it to give a bullet point list of feedback. All right. So let me just copy this and let me see what happens if I just put this. Okay, programming language Python, question, print hello world in Python, student code such and console.log hello. Okay, let's first see what it does if I simply submit this. So it says correct code, print hello world. That's not what I want. I want it to print correct or incorrect, and then I want it to give me feedback. So I need to steer its behavior. I need to give it instructions in terms of how it needs to behave. So I've written out a quick prompt over here. So this is now where we are getting into prompt engineering, which is basically just coming up with a clear list of instructions on how the model should behave. Okay. So now we have set up a system prompt that says you are a virtual evaluator for coding questions. Given a question, some code written by a student and the programming language, your job is to determine whether the code correctly solves the question. If it's correct, reply correct. If it is incorrect, reply incorrect. And in the next few lines, explain why the code is incorrect using bullet points without giving away the answer. Keep your explanation short. So that is the level of detail that you need to give into your prompts to actually get a good response from the model. Okay. So now if I click submit again, this time the model is going to behave, I hope, almost exactly as I expect it to behave, which is to just say incorrect, followed by a list of 3 options. Okay. Now, of course, you can even ask it to generate JSON. It does not always follow the instructions, but you can look up, there are a bunch of guides on prompt engineering on how you can get your model to generate a JSON output, how you can get it to generate a markdown output or whatever you want, so that you can actually take the response of the model and use it in some kind of a structured form. Okay. So now, of course, I can continue the conversation here and I can say, okay, what is the correct code? And then I click submit. And it says the correct code to print hello world in Python is print hello world, and so on. All right. So that is a quick crash course on prompt engineering. Just give very clear instructions and maybe even give examples. If you give some examples, that also helps the model understand how to react. Okay. So there seems to be a question. We can take one. Yes. We are reinitiating the conversation. Yes, we are reinitiating the conversation. So every time you change the system message, I would, on the playground at least, I would just go and clear the whole thing and then maybe come back and paste it from scratch. So every time you change the system message, you have to reinitiate the conversation. Okay. Yeah. Keep that in mind. All right. So now we've built out the logic of our bot. Now we want to understand how exactly to build out the UI. So this first part is something that is going to carry over into your Python Streamlit workshop as well. On the playground, you can experiment no matter whether you're using Python, JavaScript, Angular, whatever framework. Now we're going to get into the second part of the workshop. This is where we are going to see how to use it within a React application. Okay. Now, to do that, because we spent a few months building this out and like working on various pieces of this, we have actually created an open source library for you that you can use to generate or to use language models within your within React applications. You don't have to use this library. You can use OpenAI has an SDK that has certain limitations. It does not stream, etc. Or you can just like use the API directly. But just to make things easier for you, we've created this library. And I'm going to share it on Slack. It is just useLLM.org. And we are just going to work through the first example here. And this library is going to encapsulate a bunch of details for us so that in the next 15-20 minutes, we can actually build out a real example that you can use and deploy. Okay. So useLLM contains a bunch of React hooks for building large language models. So here is an example. This is a AI chatbot. You can just say, what is 3 plus 4? And it's going to calculate it and it's going to reply. We have a bunch of other examples that we built out as well. I think this supports speech too. So I could say, what can you do for me? And it's going to transcribe the speech and it is going to send it. And the assistant is going to reply. So all of this is just a few lines of code with the library, and I will show you the docs quickly over time. But let's get started and let us see how you can actually build out a simple React.js application using this using the useLLM library. So it helps you integrate React applications and large language models using just like OpenAI's ChatGPT and add AI-powered features into your React apps. And it also supports message streaming, prompt engineering, audio transcription, text to speech, and a bunch of other things out of the box that we have been building over the last 2-3 months. So let's build a simple, as an example, let's build a simple ChatGPT powered travel planner app. That is the example given here. And then we'll see if we can modify that to cover our lead code assistant as well. Okay. We're going to build a simple ChatGPT travel planner app using the library and see how it works. And to do this, we are going to use the Next.js framework, right? So you can use it with any React framework, but I'm going to use Next.js. How many people are familiar with Next.js? A few of you? Okay. How many people have used Create React app? Many of you. Okay. So if you've used React, if you've ever tried to create a React application, then you have these tools that are used to create these apps. So I'm just going to use this tool called Create Next App. And all of this is already documented. So you don't have to worry about how exactly you should do this. You can just follow along with this. So I'm going to come in here and into a terminal over here. Let's see. Let me go into my desktop. And in my desktop, I'm just going to initialize a new application. So I'm going to say, I have Node.js installed. So I have Node.js, I believe 20 installed. So make sure you install Node.js before you try to do this. You'll need to do that. So in my desktop, I'm just going to say npx create next app latest travel planner. Now that is going to create a folder called travel planner on my desktop. Would I like to use TypeScript? Yes. Would I like to use ESLint? Yes. I'm just going to select all the default configurations. But you will see in a second that on my desktop, now I have this travel planner folder. And inside this, there is going to be a bunch of code that I can start writing. Okay. All right. So now I enter the travel planner folder and I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio Code. How many of you have used Visual Studio Code? Most of you? Perfect. Great. I hope you have that installed. So here is Visual Studio Code and here is the code that we are looking at. So this is a basic Next.js application. You can see there's a bunch of README instructions in here as well. And you can see how to run the development server and do a bunch of things. The actual code is inside the app folder. So you can see here, there is some React code, there is some page code and so on. So that is the basic setup of a simple application that you can, of course, you should probably know by this point, but you can create it just by following the instructions here. Now, once the app is created, then we want to navigate into the project directory and install the useLLM package. So I'm just going to go into the project directory. So again, come back to my terminal. I'm inside the project directory already, and I'm just going to run npm install useLLM latest. So that is just a npm package that I install. And it contains all the functions, etc., that I will need to use. And now I can run a development server. Okay. Again, we're going slightly fast because it's all documented, but all we are doing here is setting up a basic project and just running a basic development server. So here is the development server. That this is what the basic empty Next.js application looks like. It's going to take a second. Yeah. So this is the user interface that we have present within our development server. Okay. So it says get started by editing app/page.tsx. So that is the file that we need to edit. And that contains all this UI that we can change. So let's go into the code and let's open up app/page.tsx. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to remove all this code over here. So like 100 or so lines of code. And I'm simply going to put in here, hello world. All right, and let's come back here and it says hello world over here. So yeah, seems like there's a strange background. Let's see, there is a globals.css file. Seems like there is a background setup that has been done somewhere. So I'm just going to get rid of this body background color and background gradient. So I'm going to get rid of that. So now we have a simple hello world project with using React and using Next.js. Okay, you could use any framework. Again, you could use Create React app. There's a bunch of other React. There's a framework called Remix, so you could use that. But of course, we're not going to get into how to use React here. We're just talking about how to build AI-powered apps within React. Okay, so now we have set up this basic project and we have also opened it up for development in VS Code. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to set up an API endpoint. So I just want to tell you the basic structure of your application, how you should structure things. So of course, you have this OpenAI API, right? So this is the OpenAI API, right? Now, your application needs to connect to the OpenAI API. So your application needs to send a request. So you will send a request. And when you send a request, the OpenAI API will reply with a response. So the OpenAI API will reply with a response, right? And we've seen what that request and response looks like. This is the request you send, and this is the response that you get back, right? So the OpenAI API sends a response. Let us just, sorry. Yeah, the OpenAI API sends a response. Now, how exactly do you use this or send this request and use the response from your React application? So remember, we need to also send this API key, this authorization header. Now, obviously, you do not want to send your API key from the browser because that will expose your API key to the end user. So what you need to do is you need to have a server or sort of a backend. Right? And you need to connect to this server. So your backend server is going to securely connect to the OpenAI API. And then you have this front end, right? So this is the front end app. So you have this front end app that is going to then connect to the backend server. So this front end app is going to be a bunch of React code, right? This backend server is something that we can actually create within Next.js. So Next.js is a full framework. So it gives you both a backend and a front end. So the front end parts we are going to write in React. So what your front end app is going to contain is the UI. So it's going to contain the user interface. From your front end app, you are going to make a connection to the server. The server is going to make a request to the OpenAI response. And here you're going to have maybe like some API keys and things like that, right? All the and maybe business logic, and then the server is going to process the response and send it back to the client. Okay, so this is the client, this is the server. Now the good thing is that Next.js along with React helps you build out both of these, right? So all of this is part of our Next.js application. So now let's start by building out our server. So essentially this will again be like a API endpoint that we're going to call, right? So let's start by building out our server. So I'm going to come in here into I'm going to share this screenshot into Slack as well so that you have this for reference as a conceptual model. Okay. Now I'm going to come in here into my VS Code and start building out the server. I think the documentation actually covers how to build it. Yeah. So to communicate with the OpenAI API, we'll need to create an API route or a backend API route. And to do that, we can create this file. So inside my Next.js project, I can create this file /API/LLM/route.ts. So inside the app folder, Next.js app folder, I'm going to create a new folder called API. Inside the API folder, I'm going to create a new folder. Oops. I'm going to create a new folder called, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to create a new folder in here called LLM. So it needs to be this name for it to work with the library. And inside it, I need to create a file called route.ts. Okay. This is just how you define API endpoints in Next.js. So if you want to create an API endpoint /API/LLM, so the API endpoint that we are creating is called is@/API/LLM that the front end is going to call. So if you want to create a folder called API called /API/LLM, you have to put that into the app folder and you have to create a route.ts file. Okay. Now into the route.ts file, we need to put in some code to actually hook up our backend to the OpenAI API. Okay, so I'm just going to put that in here. So let's see what we are doing. We are saying import create LLM service from useLLM. So there is some LLM service that we are going to create. Into this LLM service, we are going to pass an OpenAI API key. Okay, this OpenAI API key will automatically be attached to all the requests when it is going to connect to the OpenAI API. And then we are saying that these are the actions that we want to support. So the useLLM library contains a bunch of different things like chat, text-to-speech, etc. You may not want to enable all of them. So you have to selectively enable certain actions. So we are going to use the chat action. And then finally, here is the actual API endpoint. So we are saying that whenever we get a post request at this API, we want to get the JSON body of the request. Okay, so we can get the JSON body. And then we're going to take this body and we're going to pass that into LLM service. All right. So again, all of this is just like a bunch of encapsulation the library is doing for you. Conceptually, what you should keep in mind is that it's going to take the body of the request that comes from your React application, and it's going to send it to OpenAI in the right format. Okay, so this is what we're doing. All we have done here is we have set up this piece. So whenever some request comes into API/LLM, it is going to attach the OpenAI API key. It's going to send the request and it's going to get the response and send that back to the user interface. Okay, so with just about 15-20 lines of code, you have a basic server ready. So that's again like some encapsulation that we've done. One thing that you might want to do later on when you actually deploy this is in this API endpoint, you might want to either add authentication, because you don't want anybody to randomly hit your API and abuse your OpenAI credits or OpenAI key. And you also want to maybe add some kind of a rate limiting. Okay. And we have guides or information on how to add both of them. But the simplest thing you can do is just set a usage limit on your OpenAI account so that you make sure that you're not getting billed beyond $5 or $10 or whatever is comfortable. But it's not very hard to add a little bit of rate limiting here. Okay. Again, you just look up certain guides and you kind of follow them, and we'll share those towards the end. But conceptually, what we've done is we've now set up this server that can make requests to OpenAI API. But of course, we have not specified an OpenAI key. We've just said process.end.OpenAI key. Should I be pasting my OpenAI key here? Probably not, because then when I push it to GitHub, everyone's going to see my key and that's going to get abused. So that is where we have to use something called environment variables. So what we need to do is we need to provide our OpenAI secret key to let the library communicate with OpenAI. And for that, we need to create this .env.local file. Again, this is a Next.js or React.js thing. We create a new file called .env.local, and this is automatically ignored. .local, and this is automatically ignored when I'm committing my code to Git. This is present in the git ignore file. And inside it, I need to add my OpenAI key. So let me come in here and let me paste my OpenAI key here. So there we go. Here is my OpenAI key. Okay. So now I've added my OpenAI key. So with that, my server is largely set up, right? So this piece is done. So we've already looked at how to do this, connect to the OpenAI API. Now we've actually set up our server as well. Now the next step for us is to actually set up the user interface. So we're going to set up a very simple user interface where there's going to be a simple input box. And in that input box, we are going to have a simple, we're going to type a destination, and our model is going to tell us, is going to plan a trip for us. Okay, right now the user interface we have is just saying hello world. Now, if I keep going in the docs, it says that we are now ready to use the useLLM hook within our application to connect to the API route that we just created. Now replace the contents of app/page.tsx with the following code. So it's like maybe 20-30 lines of code. So let's maybe copy that, paste that in, and see what exactly that does. So right now there is just this hello world code over here. So I'm going to replace the hello world code. So I'm inside app/page.tsx. I'm going to replace it with this. And let's just first see what it does, and then we can actually go through the code itself. Okay, so it says that there's a title here, travel planner, and it says enter a destination, and it says hit submit. So let me see, Thailand, and I hit submit, and it's gonna potentially come back to me with this planned trip to Thailand. Now, of course, if I just did this directly in ChatGPT, chat.openai.com, it's not going to come up with a proper trip. It says it gives me information about Thailand, but here it did. So obviously I've done some prompt engineering here. Okay. So let's see how exactly it's doing. It looks like it's creating a 7-day trip. Let's maybe put Indonesia. And let's see what it says then. Yeah. Again, it says visit Bali for 3 days, Gili Islands and Jakarta for 3 days. So it's still again giving me a 7-day trip. So let's see how exactly this is working. So here's what we're doing. Inside the page.tsx, we are doing this use client. That's just something you have to put into Next.js these days. You import useLLM from useLLM. So there is this React hook. Who's familiar with hooks in React? Use state, use. Okay. All right. You can read a little bit about hooks in React. And then we are using this React use state hook. But let's look at the user interface first. So in the user interface, we have this div. Then we are creating this h1 tag, which is basically the title over here, travel planner. Then we have this input and button. So we have this text box, and then we have a button. So here's a text box, and here is a button. It says enter a destination, and the button says submit. And then we have a simple div to display the result. So there are just 3 elements in our UI. So there's an input box, there's a button, and there is a div over here. Okay. Now, again, if you're new to React, then this can seem intimidating, but do stick around for the Python workshop if you're more familiar with Python, because you'll see how to do all of this in plain Python. All right. Now, what happens when we actually type something into the button, into the input box? So let's say I'm typing Singapore. So if I type Singapore, what we do is we actually set that into a state variable over here. So we have this set location function, and that's going to set the location for us. So we are setting the information that we are going to Singapore in a state variable. And then what happens when we click the button? So when we click submit, what exactly happens? So what happens is we call this function called handle click. Now, what happens in this handle click function? So in this handle click function, let me get rid of this try catch for now. Let's just keep it simple. So in this handle click function, we are saying LLM.chat. So first we are calling this hook useLLM, and that is going to give us this variable LLM. And then we are saying await LLM.chat. Don't even need await actually. Yeah. So we are saying await LLM.chat. Then we are giving it a list of messages. And then we are saying stream true and on stream. So for a second, let's forget about stream true and on stream. But here we are giving it a system message. So the system message that we are passing is you are a travel planner bot, given a destination, generate an itinerary for 1-week trip, keep it short and sweet. Okay, so this is the system message that we have given to our bot. And then along with the system message, we also add a user message, and the user message is simply destination. And into the destination, we add the location. Okay, so all we've really done is we have taken whatever the user has entered. We have turned that into a message. Along with that, we've also created a system prompt over here, and we have given that, and we are calling LLM.chat. So what does LLM.chat do? Well, when we call LLM.chat, that is going to invoke /API/LLM, which is going to in turn invoke the OpenAI API, which is going to send us a response, and that response is going to be sent back. And then that response can be processed by our API. Okay. So there are a couple of ways in which we can process the response. In this case, if you notice, if I type Singapore and click submit, you can see that I'm getting the response token by token. This is called streaming. Okay. So to get the response token by token, you need to pass the argument stream to true. And you also need to set a on stream value. So you need to set on stream. And every time you get a new token, you can actually set that response. So that's one way to do it. But the other way to do it is, instead of doing that, you can simply wait for the final message to come out. So you don't want to stream, you just want to get the message in one shot. And then you just set result message. Okay, I need to await this. And set result, message.content. Yeah. So the message is going to have a role, and the message is going to have a content. So I'm just going to set the message content here. So once again, now if I type, let's say Bangalore, Now you can see that I'm not getting the response token by token. It's actually going to wait for the entire request to complete. And at the end of it all, it is going to just print the entire thing at once. Okay. So day one, arrival in Bangalore, day two, visit Bangalore Palace, day three, Nandi Hills, all of it at once. So there are two ways to use the API. You can get the entire response at once, or you can stream it token by token. Again, the useLLM library allows you to do that. And there are detailed docs that you can use to do it. Okay. So yeah, that is how it works. So that is our travel planner. Now, obviously, we're giving the example of travel planner because that's the first idea a lot of people get. So please don't make the travel planner for the hackathon. Make something other than that, something more creative. But this is essentially what you need to do. Over the next day or two, you need to build out an application like this. You need to record a screenshot of it. A screen recording of it, create a short presentation about it, and submit that, and you could win. And there are also instructions on how to deploy this to the cloud. So what you can do is you can push this project to GitHub. Let's see if I can quickly do that. So if I go to github.com, you know what, I'll skip that. But basically, who knows how to push a project to GitHub? Most of you, right? All right. So if you have a project on GitHub, then there's this platform called Vercel that you can use to deploy your Next.js applications. So all the instructions are given here. You can look it up online. A Next.js project is very easy to deploy. So you can also deploy it. But I do want to mention that before you deploy any React application connecting to OpenAI to production, maybe you want to add authentication. So check out this tool called Clerk that can help you add authentication. And maybe also you want to add rate limiting. So check out this tool called Upstash that can help you add rate limiting. Again, each of these will probably take about half an hour or so to set up. The way you should approach this, especially for hackathons, is that you don't need to first read the docs and understand everything before you begin. Just follow some tutorial, get something working, modify the code to do what you want, and keep going forward. Okay. So that is how you create a simple application using the useLLM library. Okay. Now, of course, we can probably change this a little bit. We can change the user interface to enter not destination location, but maybe let's try to create this lead code assistant real quick. So in this case, we'll take a question and the student code, and we will send that. And we also have a system prompt. So first, I'm going to grab my system prompt and I'm going to replace that. So here is my system prompt that I have. I am going to come in here and change, instead of saying you're a travel planner bot, I'm going to put in you're a virtual evaluator for coding questions. I'm going to change the title of the page to lead code assistant. Okay. And I am going to create two inputs this time. I'm going to have one input that contains the code. So or one input to enter the question. So enter question here. And then one is going to be enter solution here. And I am going to have two state variables. So I'm going to have question, use question, set question equals use state. I'm going to similarly say solution, set solution equals use state. And okay, let's set this value to question. Let's set this value to set question. Let's set this value to solution. And let's set this to set solution. All right. And I'm going to change this to text area. And let's see text area. And let's show 3 rows here, or 3 rows and 3 rows. And maybe let's also just put one below the other. Okay. So let's see, we've done a quick change to our user interface. And now it says lead code assistant, where you enter a question, solution, and submit. Let's add maybe a little bit of padding. Let's add maybe MB2, a little bit of margin below it. Okay, so now we have a lead code assistant. It says enter a question, enter a solution, hit submit. And we've also configured our system prompt. So now if I come in here and if I say the question is print hello world in Python, and the solution I enter is console.log hello. Hopefully, if everything has gone right, it's going to say, okay, this is not a question. It's not, okay. We need to also set this. Yeah. So let us change this prompt as well. So what we need to do is we need to send the question and the answer both to the user. So I'm going to say question. Yeah, it auto generate. So I'm using GitHub Copilot, which basically writes 90% of the code for me. But this is what we would eventually do. Question, and solution. So yeah, let's click submit again. And hopefully it should say incorrect. Console.log is not a valid Python function. Print is the correct function to use in Python. All right. So just like that, we've created our lead code assistant from scratch. And this is something that you can literally just modify around, add a few fields here and there, and build out your first prototype. Okay. So that is a quick start. You can, of course, push it to GitHub. Definitely do that when you're making a submission. And you can also then deploy to Vercel if you want, but make sure to add authentication and rate limit. Okay, quick thing I want to show you is we have a couple more utilities here. One is called use chat, one is called register agent that you can use to build out more powerful and flexible chatbots. So I'm just going to run through this in 5 minutes because I know we've covered a lot of ground already, but all of this is documented so you can follow along and use it. Okay. So use chat is sometimes you might want to build more than just a question and response. You might want to build a proper AI chatbot. So for that, we have this use chat hook. Okay. So what this has is it can maintain a message history for you. It can maintain a list of messages. It can maintain the current input and all. So there's a simple example here that I'm going to quickly just copy paste and show you. So I'm going to put this in a different place. I'm going to create a folder inside the app called chatbot / yeah, I'm going to create a folder called chatbot and put in page.tsx here and put in my code. Let's first see it in action. So this is going to show up as @/chatbot. Yeah. So this is what the example with use chat looks like. I'm a chatbot powered by the ChatGPT API. Ask me anything. So what can you do for me? And it says as an AI chatbot, I can help you with various tasks, etc. So this is an example of a chatbot interface. So in case you want to build out a proper chatbot interface, then you might want to check out the use chat example. Again, all of this is documented here. So you just go into the sidebar and you, instead of useLLM, you check out use chat and you'll be able to use it. How does it work? Well, the code here is a little more complex. So what we're doing is we have a list of messages that we are rendering. So we are keeping a list of messages. And then we have an input where the user enters an input, and then we have a button. So still just 3 elements. So there is this message history, which renders a list of messages. There is this input box and a button. Now, where does all this come from? All of this comes from the use chat hook. So instead of the use LLM hook, you call the use chat hook. It gives you an input, set input. This is something that you can hook up with your input box. It gives you a set of messages and a send messages list. So all you want to do is you just call send messages when the button is clicked. And what you can also do is you can also give a set of initial messages. So here we have given an initial messages. Maybe this should, yeah, the initial message is assistant. You can add maybe a system message here. So you can say role system. Let's see, maybe we can build out like a quick travel planner again. So content, you're a travel planner. Create a 7-day itinerary, something like that. All right, and so that's a system message. And let's skip the assistant message. Let's just keep a system message here. So if I change this and reload the page, okay, so there's a system message that says you're a travel planner, create a 7-day itinerary. I'm going to say destination Thailand, and it's going to reply arrival day 1, day 2, Koh Samui. Okay, a bunch of good places. And now I can continue talking. Okay, so now I can say, okay, what are interesting things I can do in Chiang Mai. All right, I click send, and then it's going to continue the conversation. Okay, so use chat if you want to build out a proper conversational UI. Another thing I want to show you is this. So this is a very new feature. This is for advanced users only. Most of you may not want to use this, but recently ChatGPT API rolled out support for functions. So here's something you can do. So here is an example, a live demo. This says, I'm an AI chatbot that can connect to the GitHub API. Ask me questions about a GitHub username. So let me ask, tell me about the GitHub user Akash NS. And then it's going to say, Okay, to get latest information about the GitHub user Akash, I need to call a function. Please review and approve the following function call. So the function it wants to call is called get GitHub user. And the arguments that are given to the function are username Akash. So ChatGPT has the ability, if you give it a list of functions, that these are available functions you can call, it can come back to you and say, I want to call this particular function with this particular input. And now if I call this function, we get back this response. So now we are calling the GitHub API, getting the response. And then the GitHub API's response is passed back to ChatGPT. And then it is going to say that, okay, using that response, it is going to generate a response saying that GitHub user Akash here are some details about the user. Okay. So again, another thing I could do is I could just ask a very specific function, a very specific question. How many repos does the user Akash have? Okay, so now I'm asking a very specific question. Again, it realizes that it needs to call a function. So it tells me that I want to call the function with these arguments. I allow it to call the function. It calls the function and it says the user Akash has 71 GitHub repositories. So it is pretty amazing. You just tell it that these are available functions and ChatGPT will tell you what it wants to call and then you need to call it and so on. You can check out the documentation about this. This was very new, very recently released. So I'm not going to go spend a lot of time on this. But yeah, there is again a complete working example that is available for you here. So what you need to do is you actually need to register an agent on the backend, and then you need to call it from the front end. So on your backend API, you need to register an agent. So something like this, you need to go in and register in your route file. You need to actually register an agent in LLM service. So you say that I'm registering an agent called GitHub Q&A, and it is going to use this particular new model, which has function calling support. And apart from a system message, here are the functions that it has access to. So the function is called get GitHub user. It has these parameters, such and such. And this is the implementation of the function. Okay. So yeah, there are ways to do it. It's just you have to look up the docs and check it out. I wouldn't, for those of you who are new to generative AI and using ChatGPT, etc., you can skip this. For those of you who are not, I would highly recommend trying it out if you've done this before. So that is the new material. Okay, and now there are a bunch of other things that you can do with this as well. So we have things like document Q&A, which is where you can actually generate embeddings if you know what that is. We have speech to text. What can you do for me? So we can actually transcribe this speech. So so again, it's just 1 or 2 lines of code to get speech to text transcription. We have text to speech as well. So if I enter some text here, it's going to generate that and speak back. We have voice chat. We have image generation. So let's see, generate a banner for a generative AI workshop. So this is connecting to the DALL-E 2 API. So we can use that. We have voice cloning support as well. Again, this is a bit alpha, but that is something that you can do as well. Okay. So it did generate something not very useful. So let's say a garden with rose flowers.